Of Mice and Men is about loneliness. Almost every character wants to make a connection with someone, but either fails to do so or loses the connection they have. The story centers on these two migrant workers, George Milton and Lennle Small, who travel together finding jobs at the farms around California's Salinas Valley. George and Lennie are unusual because they stick together while most migrant workers are loners. They're also unusual because they're so different from each other. George is small and shrewd, while Lennie is large and has a mental disability. George takes care of Lennie, and they have this dream of one day getting their own farm. At the beginning of the book, George and Lennie arrive at a small pond. They've been traveling all day on their way to a farm where they're going to work. George notices that Lennie is holding something and makes him hand it over. It's a dead mouse that Lennie was petting in his pocket while they walked. George throws it into the brush. Lennie remembers a woman who used to give him mice, but stopped because he kept killing them on accident. The woman was his Aunt Clara. George complains that his life would be so easy if he didn't have to take care of Lennie. He wouldn't have to worry about Lennie getting into trouble like he did at the last farm. Lennie saw a girl in a red dress, and he liked the look of her dress so much that he wanted to touch it. When Lennie touched the dress, the girl screamed. Lennie panicked and grabbed hold of the dress. The girl claimed she was raped, and a mob formed to lynch Lennie. Lennie wants George to tell him again how they're different from other guys, and George gives his speech. He says most guys who work on ranches are lonely. They have no family, nothing to look forward to, and don't belong anywhere. But he and Lennie are different, and one day they're going to get their own place. They'll have a little house, and they can raise cows and chickens and have a vegetable patch. They'll have a rabbit hutch, too, and Lennie can look after the rabbits. When he's done, he tells Lennie that if Lennie gets into any trouble at the new ranch, he should come back to the pond and hide in the brush. The next morning, George and Lennie arrive at the farm they're supposed to work at, and they meet the boss. They're going to work bucking barley, meaning they pass these large bags filled with barley up a line and stack them in a truck. The boss leaves, and an old man named Candy shows up with his old sheepdog. While he's talking to George and Lennie, Curly comes in looking for the boss, who's his father. He notices George and Lennie, and he asks them a bunch of questions and generally acts like a jerk. After Curly leaves, Candy explains that Curly is a pretty good boxer, and he hates big guys like Lennie because he's not big himself. George warns that he better not start with Lennie, because Lennie is strong and doesn't fight with any rules. Candy says Curly's wife flirts with all the farmhands, especially Slim. Candy goes out, and a little while later, Curly's wife shows up in the doorway. She tries to make conversation, but George makes it clear he doesn't want to talk to her. Lennie just stares at her. The next chapter starts an unspecified amount of time later. After working all day, George comes into the bunkhouse with Slim, a jerkline skinner, or the lead driver of a mule team, and one of the most respected guys on the ranch. George thanks Slim for giving Lennie one of the puppies from his dog's new litter. George explains that he and Lennie were both born in Auburn, and that he knew Lennie's Aunt Clara. When she died, Lennie went out working with George, and they just got used to each other. George used to play lots of jokes on Lennie, until one day he got Lennie to jump into a river. Lennie couldn't swim and almost drowned, but he was so nice to George when George helped pull him out of the river that George never did anything mean to him again. Candy comes back into the bunkhouse with his old dog, and another worker, Carlson, follows them in shortly after. Carlson starts talking about how bad Candy's dog smells, and how it's old and suffering. He could shoot the dog in the back of the head, and the dog wouldn't even feel it. Then Candy could take one of Slim's new puppies. Candy protests, but the general opinion in the bunkhouse seems to be that they should put the dog down. Candy gives in, and Carlson leads the dog out. A young laborer named Whit comes in, and there's some strained silence and awkward conversation while everyone tries not to talk about Candy's dog. Candy just lies in bed rigidly, staring at the ceiling, and finally they hear the shot fired outside. Crooks, an old black man who works on the ranch, comes in and tells Slim that Lennie keeps messing with the puppies, taking them away from their mother and playing with them. Slim and Crooks go out to the barn to check on Lennie and put some tar on a mule's foot. Carlson comes back in, and Lennie comes in too. Carlson sits in his bunk and doesn't say anything about Candy's dog, just starts cleaning his gun. Curly walks in and asks if anyone has seen his wife. He realizes Slim's not in the bunkhouse. When George says Slim went to the barn, Curly leaves in a hurry. Whit and Carlson go out behind him, expecting a fight if Curly catches his wife with Slim. Lennie asks George how long it's going to be until they have their own farm and raise rabbits. George says he doesn't know, that they have to save a lot of money first. Lennie asks George to tell him again what the place will be like, and George starts describing it. He says they'll have 10 acres, with their own house, a windmill, a little shack, a chicken run, and orchard trees, like apple trees and peach trees. They'll have pigs and a smokehouse, where they can smoke hams and bacon. It'll be their place, where they belong, and they won't have to travel around anymore, or plant crops for someone else, or buck barley for 11 hours a day. Lennie says they'll also have rabbits he can take care of. Candy asks if George really knows of such a place, and how much it would cost. George is defensive, and wants to know why Candy is asking. Candy explains that he's not of much use to anyone, since he has only one hand. It's only a matter of time before they get rid of him. He has money saved up, and George can put it to the farm if he can get in on the place with George and Lennie. With Candy's money, they could actually buy the place, so they plan to save money for another month, then to collect their pay and leave. Slim, Curly, Carlson, and Whit all come in together. Curly keeps apologizing to Slim, apparently for suspecting Slim of being with his wife. Curly sees Lennie smiling, and gets angry because no big son of a bitch laughs at him. Lennie stands and backs away from Curly, but Curly starts hitting him. Curly busts Lennie's nose and cuts his face up. Lennie catches one of Curly's fists and crushes it in his hand. Curly starts writhing in pain. Finally, Lennie releases Curly, whose hand is completely broken. Lennie keeps saying he didn't want to do it. George asks Slim if they're going to get fired, but Slim tells Curly to say he got his hand caught in a machine, or he'll tell everyone what Lennie did, and everyone will laugh at Curly. The next night, while most of the guys head into town to go to a brothel, Lennie wanders over to the room of the stable buck, Crooks. None of the other ranch workers ever go into Crooks's room because he's black. Candy comes looking for Lennie, and the three of them end up sitting and talking together. Curly's wife comes to the doorway looking for Curly. Candy tells her to leave because they don't want trouble. Curly's wife gets angry and says she likes to talk to people too. Crooks tells her to get out of his room, but she tells him to shut up. She says she could get him strung up a tree so fast it's not even funny. It's a Sunday afternoon, and Lennie is in the barn by himself. He looks at the puppy he accidentally killed and talks to it, asking it why it had to die. Curly's wife finds Lennie there hiding something. When she notices the puppy, Lennie explains he was playing with it, but when it went to bite him he smacked it, and the puppy died. She tries to console Lennie, but he still doesn't want to talk to her because George will get mad at him, and then George won't let him tend the rabbits. He likes rabbits because he likes to touch soft things. Curly's wife says she understands, that sometimes she'll just sit and stroke her hair because it's so soft, and she invites Lennie to touch her hair. Lennie strokes her hair, but he does it too hard, and she gets mad at him. She becomes angry and jerks her head away, but Lennie panics and grabs hold of her hair. He covers her mouth to keep her from screaming, and she starts to struggle violently. He shakes her, accidentally breaking her neck. She lies still, and eventually Lennie realizes what he's done. He remembers what George told him, that if anything goes wrong, he should go hide in the brush by the pond. Candy is the first to find Curly's wife. He calls in George, and they both know that Lennie did it, and that Curly's going to want to have Lennie lynched. Candy wonders if they can still get the farm together, and George replies that he guesses he knew it would never happen. All the guys go into the barn, and they know right away who killed Curly's wife. Curly wants to find Lennie and kill him. Carlson says his gun is missing, and they think Lennie must have taken it. George knows there's nothing he can do. He has to go with them so they don't think he had a part in the murder. Lennie goes back to the pond where George told him to hide. He says to himself that George is going to yell at him. Then he hallucinates. He sees his Aunt Clara. She says if it weren't for Lennie, George could do anything he wants, like spend his pay in a whorehouse. Then Lennie sees a giant rabbit. The rabbit tells him that George won't ever let him take care of the rabbits. It says George is going to beat him with a stick, and tells him over and over that George is going to leave him. George arrives at the pond. Lennie asks George to tell him why they're not like other guys, and George says most guys don't have any family, or anyone who cares about them, but he and Lennie have each other. Lennie wants to hear about the farm they're going to have. While George talks, he tells Lennie to take off his hat, and he takes out Carlson's pistol. When Lennie looks off and imagines the farm, George shoots him in the back of the head and kills him. All the other guys show up and see that George shot Lennie. Slim tells George that he had to do it. He helps him up and takes him to get a drink. Carlson and Curly wonder why George and Slim are so upset. For more information about Of Mice and Men, check out the Of Mice and Men SparkNote on SparkNotes.com.